Hello, everyone. My name is Carla Medrano, and I am the co-host of Rural Comics Podcast. Welcome to season two. We got so much for y'all. I can't even talk. We got so much for y'all this season, but we're back. I am a wife, a mom, a nurse, a voice actor, a co-host of an amazing podcast. I'm a little bit of everything. What we call it, multi-hyphenate
Yes.
person. And we are here with Priest Jacobs. But before we get into this amazing interview, my lovely co-host.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to season two. I am Dr. Ebony Toussaint. I'm also a wife and a mom and a nurse. I'm also a research scientist, and I'm excited to be here. Royal Comics Podcast, where we discuss health, culture, and comics. This is a safe space, y'all. Thank y'all for joining us.
All right, you want to kick it off? Now the bio is here, and it's very impressive. Um,
Please don't say that.
it's very impressive. Preach Jacobs is a two-time South Carolina Press Association award winner for column writing for his column Fight the Power, featured in the Free Times and Post and Courier Columbia. He founded ColaCon, the nation's only hip hop comic book convention, as a hip hop artist and DJ, contributing to the South Carolina art scene for over 20 years. He was named ambassador to Columbia, South Carolina in 2022. Jacobs is a writer producer for the PBS DS series Citizen Better and The Priest Jacobs Show, and podcast and co owner of Soul House
Soul House. Yeah.
Art Gallery in Columbia, South Carolina. His latest album, Francis, was named one of the top albums of 2023 in South Carolina by Charleston Scene magazine. We leveling up this season.
I
I
mean,
mean,
you got me blushing.
we
Hold
had
on.
we had some incredible guests in season one, but I feel like season two is just opening up my world to all these incredible people. And I have to thank Ebony for that. You know, she's introducing me to a lot of incredible people. So welcome to the pod. Welcome
Thank
to
y'all for having me. Thank y'all. Thank you. Thank you, Ebony. Yeah, it's always funny when you hear stuff like that. Like you got to make the face. Like you ever go to a church and they have like the visiting minister and he just got his eyes closed while he's saying all his accolades. Like it's always weird. So like I think that as an artist, we're always concerned with the work. So when people are like telling us the things that we've done in the past, it's kind of an awkward thing, but it's kind of cool to hear it. So I'm just glad to be here with these strong, beautiful black women doing amazing work, especially in the arts field, which, to see more representation, I'm just glad to be a part of it.
thank you. And thank you for coming. All right. Ebony, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I usually remember the first question that we ask all of our guests is,
Uh-huh.
what was your introduction to comic books and the comic space? Like, when did you know you wanted to be a part of this world?
I look at that the same way I think about hip hop culture is that I don't know if there was an aha moment. I just think that it was just something that you just gravitate towards. You want to be around people that look like you, right? And so what I remember the most is like as a young kid, my dad used to take us to the newsstand and they would have a comic book section and I would just gravitate. It was like, who's black on the cover, right? And I think there was what was his name? There was a black comic book character named Deathlock. And I remember seeing that. And that was like one of the first ones that I got for myself because usually I would share stuff with my brother, but that was like one of the first ones I got for myself. And it was a black character. And I was like, all right, I'm with it. So with anything that I was doing, I'm looking for people that look like me. And then, um, Colacon was interesting because I always thought hip hop and comic book culture just made sense because they kind of just meshed together. So there was just something about both of those cultures that just made sense early on. So I've always been involved in it. And I really don't know when it started, but that's kind of the earliest memory, if y'all had to put a gun to my head, that I think I can kind of tie to it.
Wow. So how long have you been an artist and how did you become a part of that world? Because you mentioned how being introduced to hip hop at an early age and then introduced to comics at an early age, it just kind of aligned
Mhm.
and both of them just kind of meshed well together. So how did that turn into you becoming a hip hop artist, and especially a artist that I feel is truly respected in the community? And I'm not saying that because you on the show. I'm saying it because your message and your music, your affiliations, your accomplishments, you do feel, I feel that you are respected among your peers. So, how did that all come about? How did you get into the hip hop culture?
You know what? Y'all better stop having me blushing on this doggone podcast, and I'm too light skinned, looking beige, and start glowing in the dark. Anyway, I tell you this. This is the best way I can make sense of it. Um, my one of my greatest heroes is Gordon Parks, and Gordon Parks to me, you know, when you hear people say stuff like "stay in your lane," that's always something that I think are terms that white America puts on black folks. Because no one says to Steve Ballmer, who owns the LA Clippers, who's in Microsoft. Nobody says stay in your lane when he buys an NBA team. He knows nothing about basketball, but when they're doing it, it's diversifying the portfolio, right? So when it came to like art and culture, Gordon Parks was someone I gravitated towards. So Gordon Parks was the first African American photographer for Vogue magazine, for Life magazine. He wrote a book called The Learning Tree that's in the Library of Congress. It's one of the greatest books of all time in American literature. He was the first black director to get a major budget when he did The Learning Tree. He directed Shaft. He did orchestras. He was a painter. And so I looked at all these amazing things that he did, and it was just this normalized thing to be a black creative. Now, some of that might have didn't mesh well growing up in a black home of country black folks because my dad don't know any artist that's making a living. You know what I'm saying? So psychologically they try to steer you away from that. But
Mhm.
looking into arts and cultures, like I said, you gravitate towards what look like you. And hip hop culture was vibrant. It was competitive. It was colorful. Graffiti is the same thing as comic books, right? So to me, though, that's why those two things always made sense to me. And so I just gravitated towards it. And about how I made my music, I never thought about being socially conscious and artistic. I didn't think there was two separate things, right? I'm like, that's what you're supposed to do. Like I grew up listening to Public Enemy. I grew up, NWA is a revolutionary group, but I also grew up with a Tribe Called Quest and De La Soul because Native Tongues made it really, really cool to be like, yo, let me learn about my ancestry. It's really dope to wear a dashiki, and I used to wear the medallions, you know what I mean? So those things where not having being proud of my blackness and being creative, those things were never weird, and those things were never two things that needed to be mutually exclusive. So it was something that it just made sense to me. And as you get older, you realize I might be able to make a living out of this, right? So I think that's how I looked at being an artist, is that I think it's a responsibility for black artists and I'm scared to say people of color because after this election I feel weird. But but I say black artists to really, really be deliberate about what they're putting out there.
Mhm.
I feel like I need to ask the brown sugar question next, Carla,
Oh my
especially since I'm like, wait, where's the Southern groups, the Southern hip hop influence? I'm very, very biased. Shout out to the 1995 Source Awards. The South got something to say.
I got a
So
story behind that. I got a story behind that. I got a story behind that. Seriously, I wrote about this. I wrote about when I was a kid. I used to pretend I was from New York, right? There was this weird let me finish. There was this really terrible self-esteem that I think that I had as a young kid because all the music that we listened to was we and the culture thought this that hip hop didn't exist in either New York or LA. Those are only two places. And so seeing a group like Outkast, that was like one of those first times where I was just like, wow, like I'm proud to be Southern, right? When you say this, I've got something to say. It was such a simple revolutionary comment. And he was booed. Andre 3000 from Outkast was booed at the Source Awards for saying that. But I think that's what ends up happening with a lot of black art, right? Is that there's a lot of times the South has been disrespected, not just in hip hop culture,
Mhm.
um, but there's this ideal that we're country bumpkins or we're not intelligent or whatever. But everybody that I know, you got family from here. You came from here. The foundation of who you are, the soul of art and culture is from the South. So even as a kid, like I had to learn that lesson. And when you think about Outkast, I would say this: the revolutionary thing isn't just about Outkast. It's about Babyface and L.A. Reid, where you had these two black men that were in the music industry that decided to say, "All right, we're gonna have a record label of all Atlanta-based artists." So it was Outkast from Atlanta, Goody Mob, TLC, Tony Braxton, all the people that were on the Face Records. They made a deliberate it was a deliberate intention to say we're going to focus on these artists in this area. And that's why, like, when you go to Atlanta and listen to Atlanta radio, they might literally only play nothing but Atlanta artists. It might just be a local radio station, but all of them are national artists or nationally known because they have that instinct to really support their own. So you're right about that. Like I do I did grow up kind of romanticizing a lot of the stuff in places that I didn't grow up from because I thought when you realize that being from the South ain't a curse, but the greatest gift that you can have, that Black experience becomes a lot better to understand. But you also got to understand that, like, psychologically, we're being beat up. Even now, I'll give you an example. During the pandemic, they used to do this thing, these porch parties, and they would have me DJ these porch parties. And in Columbia, South Carolina, is a historical black area off North Main where all the black people used to live. Now ain't nothing but white people out there, right? And I'm up here DJing these porch parties on Confederate Avenue. And all these street names are named after Confederate generals, right? And when you think about it, if this is a historically black area, what better way to remind black people of their place than to name streets after Confederate generals? You see what I'm saying? So the psychology of it with me growing up, maybe that's why I didn't have that strong self-esteem right away. And I needed to see the outcasts of the world say these things to me because I subconsciously didn't realize or think about the power of being from the South. Well, I be talking, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, no. I didn't want to. That's Ebony's lane right there. I mean, I'm a Southern girl, but I'm not truly Southern like Ebony. So
Probably got roots in Georgia and the Carolinas, preach.
yeah.
Don't let her fool you. And she up in Maryland, which Maryland is technically south of the Mason-Dixon. So we include Maryland in the South. You've mentioned hip hop a lot. And I know you've said before you're an artist, jazz artist, not just like limiting yourself to hip hop. And again, talking about that box and like Gordon Parks. So how has hip hop, I guess, and or jazz influenced your work? And was this an intentional choice for you? You mentioned your roots in the South and, were your parents supportive?
They didn't know how to be supportive, but again, that goes back to, when we're younger, we think our parents are mean to us, and when we get older, it's like my dad wanted to save me and protect me, right? Like every black stereotype you can think of like the revolutionary black kid. Like I was listening to Dead Prez, had dreads down my back. My dad was trying to make sure I didn't get shot by the cops, right? So if he was pushing me to step away from the art, he knew like, hey man, I know how this ends if it's a little too loud in these areas, and my dad don't say much about it. My dad used to be in the Nation of Islam. He got like these old school Elijah Muhammad books that he used to have, and he eat pork now. But back in the day, before I was born, like he gravitated towards that, and I can understand that. A black man in the South or in America, you're looking for something. You're looking for something that's telling me that, hey, I am special, I am important, right? So when I talk about the musical influence, when I say I'm a jazz artist, I mean that kind of tongue in cheek, where I make hip hop music, but I think the approach that I make is that I'm thinking from a jazz artist perspective, right? Because if you look at traditional hip hop stuff, um, as I've gotten older, the way I gravitate towards jazz is if you're a trumpet player or a horn player or play the drums, there's some of these musicians that passed away recently, they're in their 90s. They died a drummer, right? It wasn't like a situation where they're like, you know what? I had a good career with this jazz stuff. Let me just hang it up. I'm like, no, they're making music until they're no longer with us. Ron Carter is still making music in his 80s right now, right? And I say that jazz perspective where, it's not crazy to be older and they embrace you by getting older. Where hip hop generally, they kind of eat their young in a way where the older you get, you're kind of like not important anymore. I think a lot of that is shifting right now because hip hop is finally able to get old in the culture, it's cool to see LL still be able to do tours and things like that. Whereas back in the day, you'll say, "Oh, somebody's 40 years old rapping, that's terrible." But what I would say about jazz, I would say this: blues, jazz, and hip hop are the greatest contributions to American culture, i.e., Black culture. Those are the greatest contributions to America that I think has transformed America as much as possible. A lot of times it holds a mirror to the country. A lot of times it's brought more people together. Unfortunately, I don't know how much hip hop is bringing people together today, but I think that historically speaking, the greatest American inventions were Black art, Black music, Black culture, and if even if white America or POCs try to doubt it, if they thought about it and looked at it, you can't really argue with that. So to me, I treat hip hop music, I treat jazz music, or treat that approach as something that should be revered, right? Like a lot of times I'm not some 25-year-old dude with a mixtape. I'm somebody that uses the culture of hip hop to try to uplift my community, be consistent in the community, and able to have a platform to help amplify other artists. So having an art gallery for an example, Soul House, my one of my goals when I have partners with the gallery is I want to make sure that there's Black art on the wall. And I know that the biggest plight I had as an artist was finding a place to house my ideas, right? That's hip hop, right? Finding ways to non-conventionally get your voice out there, have a voice for the voiceless. That's hip hop culture. And I take that everywhere that I go.
And I mean, I'm not a listener of jazz per se, but I remember some of my early core memories was based in hip hop. And I
Hmm.
remember being in the room with my older sister listening to Salt and Pepper. That was her group. And I
Hmm.
remember it was a song, and I still remember the first verse to this day called they rapping about tramps. It has what we would
Would
call
you call me
scrubs.
today?
Yes.
Yeah.
Da, 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 da. So, but those early songs was rooted in, respect for our bodies, um, kind of pushing back against some of the stereotypes that Black women were put under. It taught me how to find my voice. It taught me that it's okay to be free and express myself. So when you say hip hop was one of the greatest contributions that we created and get given to America and the world, because it's
Mhm.
all over the world, I really do believe that because our generation, we're in our 40s and Ebony, we're a little lot older than you, girl.
Look,
But
look,
I think for the most part, our the 40s and up, we have a certain perspective when it comes to work ethic and perfecting our craft and respect for others, and that was taught in part by hip hop, because that's what hip hop was, for me, a way to express things that I couldn't normally express in another setting. So I definitely feel, I definitely agree with that. I definitely agree with that.
Are
Um,
we in the trust tree? Are we in the trust tree? Can I say something that I really, really stand by when it comes to hip hop culture? I I say this and I feel this is right. And I feel like hip hop needs to do this again. But the reason why we grew up with hip hop and it resonates with us so much is that when we grew up on it, it was ours. And what I mean by that is not saying that white folks can't be contributing or can't be a part of the culture, but ultimately we made the rules on what was acceptable, not acceptable. It's not acceptable to copy somebody. It's acceptable. You got to be creative. You got to have your own style, your own vibes, whatever, whatever. I say this, that hip hop and black art operates at its best when it's not concerned about the approval of whiteness. Y'all can appreciate it, y'all can listen to it, y'all can embrace it. You know what I'm saying? I'm seeing white people wearing Basquiat t-shirts. Hey, good for you. Appreciate that. Same thing about the Confederate Avenue. The white people got them Black Lives Matter signs in their yard. Okay, all right, appreciate it. But at its core, hip hop and black art operates the best when it's not worried about the approval of white folks. And you saw something like this. The closest thing I saw in recent memory, 2014, 2015, there was this renaissance of black music. You had Solange's Seat at the Table. You had Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly. You had D'Angelo's Black Messiah. These were very, very blackety black albums that were having conversations with black people specifically, right? And nobody needed to say, we got to make a song for radio. All Right was a protest anthem that became a pop song, not a pop song that tried to become a protest anthem, right? And so that was like probably the most recent that I saw hip hop operating at its full capacity to be able to see, all right, we can have these conversations with just us. Other people can be involved, other people will appreciate it, but y'all don't need to interrupt us when we're talking to each other right now. And I think that in the comic books world, you can see that shift happening as well. So the homie Sanford Green, when he's doing something like Bitter Root, that was a very, very intentional black conversation with black people and black culture, between the Harlem Renaissance and the stuff that they're working on with now that's going to touch on some other things. Like, and it also goes against the myth that if you have in these black conversations that people won't support it. They have two Eisners. It's being made into a movie, right? So to show the world also in black creatives that you can tell these stories that you want to talk about with people that look like you, and there is a market out there, I think that's important as well.
I agree.
So talking about For Us, By Us, FUBU, we're all 80s babies here, so we remember FUBU and all of our other hip hop or urban influence streetwear. Um, was ColaCon, your convention at the intersection of hip hop and comic books, was that meant to be FUBU, For Us, By Us?
I'm gonna tell you a secret. I may have told him this, he might not know this, but I started ColaCon for Sanford. And I mean that in a literal sense of it's my homie doing some amazing work. And we could be in Target and people don't know who he is, right? And but if you go to a convention, everybody know who he is, right? Totally different worlds. But I was doing partnerships with the Columbia Museum of Art, and they were like, "You got any ideas for any programming?" I said, "Yeah, I want to do a hip hop comic convention where that was the perfect intersection for me because I don't know all the inside baseball on a lot of comic book culture. Sanford was kind of my person that took me through a lot of this stuff. And it was really cool because the comic book people really loved me. The creators loved me because I wasn't like, googly eyed over them because I probably didn't know how famous they were. And so I could appreciate them and learn them in a different way. But I was more of a hip hop person and a comic books person. And I was just like, Sanford was kind of ahead of that realm where you look at what's happening with the Amazing Spider-Man animated cartoons that the two movies that came out. It's heavily hip hop influence, right? Where we was doing that with Cole Khan a decade ago. I don't know if that type of movie could have existed 10 years ago when we started Colacon. But I was partnering with the Museum of Art in the first year. We had a headliner. We had Talib Kweli perform, Ninth Wonder, and Rhapsody performed. I had panel discussions, some stuff with like Black creatives in comic book and artistic community. So I had like Sanford on the panel with speech from Arrested Development. The second year we had Ghostface Killer and Fight from A Tribe Called Quest headlining it. We had panels with the creators from the Boondocks. The third year we did it. We did Foreign Exchange and Dead Prez. There was always an intention of course, the comic book conventions where you have Artist Alley and people selling that stuff, which is an important thing. But I also wanted to make sure that there were these opportunities to have conversations with Black people that were successful in their creative disciplines to be able to have these conversations and interact with people in the community. And that was just something I just didn't see. And so that intention it initially was I wanted to do this event and give my homie a key to the city. We had a Black mayor at the time, and I'm like, y'all need to get Sanford Green a key to the city. We gave it to him at Colacon, right? And it was just kind of a cool, I wouldn't say a flex, but it was like a cool thing to be able to have an opportunity and say, if I have this platform and I see amazing people doing things in my community, we're supposed to highlight them because what happens all the time is that we wait until somebody else celebrates our people from South Carolina. Then we want to be like, oh, he's from here, right? So um, there's something in the water with South Carolina. There's a lot of, great stuff between Chadwick Boseman, between Sanford, between Michael Coulter. Like there is something where you see a lot of these black creatives in that sphere coming out of there. And I don't think that's an accident. Um, so yeah, I think that's kind of like the origins. That was kind of like the simplified version. It was like I had an opportunity to do something dope, had a partnership with the museum. Hey, hip hop and comics, let's make it work. And it was great. I think the only reason I stopped doing it because the way I wanted to do it versus the support from a financial perspective, like because if you're getting grant money from the city, um, I'll give you a conversation that I had with them. They were like, "Hey, you ever think about doing Colicon and maybe having like a country headliner?" And I'm like, "Mm-mm," because it wouldn't be Colicon, right? Right? Like
Mhm.
it's like the idea of hip hop and comics is so terrifying in a way that it just became like, well, we would give you money, but there's this stigma with hip hop, right? And so I'm like, if I can't do it the way I want to do it, and look, my credit messed up right now because I put Ghostface Killer on a credit card, right? So it's like, right, like, you know,
Why you do that?
look, you think I'm playing, like that, but to
Okay.
me. I was like, I want to do this for the community, and if I'm being forced to do something else with it, then I don't want to do it. So yeah.
Yeah, just it just speaks to what you said when people try to step and come on into the car with us, come on into the kitchen
Hmm.
with us, how the message becomes very clouded and muddled and at that point it's not ours anymore. So I
Well,
understand that.
more than the message, what has to happen with artists and black creatives, I'll say this specifically, whatever discipline you have, whether it's comic books, whether it's music, whether it's tap dancing, I don't care. You have to have a definition of what success means to you, right?
Mhm.
And and when you don't have a definition, people automatically think success is proximity to whiteness. And what happens with that when you're a black content creator or a content creator that happens to be black, right? It could be one and the same. There becomes a shifting in how you tell your stories. It becomes a shifting in how you carry yourself. It becomes and some people they don't care about that, right? But how like I said, how I look at my responsibility as an artist or as a creative, you know, I tell people this. I end up in a lot of spaces where I'm the only black person in the space. But I tell folks the difference between a token and a random black person in a white space is a token changes who they are to be there. I'm always myself wherever I go, right? And I think that's an important distinction that we can be in these places, we can be in the creative sphere, say that we're making things for us and people that look like us, and then not be such a negative thing, right? Especially now. Now, look here. Now, I want to know, all right, of all the places you think would be a safe place for liberalism, I went to Trader Joe's last night. And this white man had on a MAGA hat, just like like this don't make sense. None of this none of this makes sense, right? And so I say that to say resistance has to happen with your art now too, right? Like I'm interested in seeing the type of art that comes out of this. I have this hip hop theory where when you look at artists like NWA, it's not an accident that they came out during the Reagan era. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes when I'm looking at certain stuff that's happening politically, you know, how does art respond to that? Right. So when you look at, Marvin Gaye doing what's going on, what was happening? You had, Nixon in the Vietnam War. So those correlations of those things, I'm interested in seeing who's going to step up to the plate and create the resistance art. And I think that honestly, more than hip hop, I think comics and the comic book industry has the greatest opportunity of answering that question.
Hmm. I agree. I mean, I everybody knows my plans for 2025, but I mean, that's you like you got a crystal ball, like you seeing into the future.
I'm not-
Yeah,
We
yeah.
taking over the world. World domination is our plan.
Let's
A
do
lot
it.
of
Let's do it.
a lot of comic book artists, at least in my social ecosystem, are really inspired right now to kind of put their thoughts on paper and produce their stories more now than ever. So I definitely, yeah, I definitely see that. And you're right, I didn't think about that, but there are correlations between, what's going on politically and socially to these groups and singers and artists
Mhm.
that come as a result of that. And I'm not quite sure how a lot of it is grasped on the grassroots level, but you have groups like a Tribe Called Quest, that was a Wu-Tang Clan that was really they were popular, not just, and they crossed the cultural line. So it's like it's really interesting that dynamic of, even though politically we feel abandoned, but yet there's somebody over there that's also giving an ear to some of these groups too. It's just really odd. It's a very conflicting,
Well, I
reality for me. That is
I had
really
this I had this inside joke with Wu-Tang Clan as I had one of the autograph covers. This is one of the pictures. So it's a photographer named Daniel Hastings. This is one of his pictures of the Wu-Tang cover that he signed for me. I wouldn't say for me, but it's signed. Wu-Tang is weird to me, right? Like, because I look at Wu-Tang the same way I think about Snoop. And if you think about 30 years ago, Snoop was to white America the scariest black man in the world, right? They were running over his CDs with a steamroller. He was the face of what white men didn't want dating their daughters, right? And now he's on T-Mobile commercials. He's literally an ambassador during the Olympics, and he's this lovable, huggable black guy now, right? Um, I would argue the same thing. I mean, last night, I know this is coming out, soon, but like, when Mike Tyson fights Jake Paul, Mike Tyson had this trajectory of being the scariest black man in the world to, oh, he's on The Hangover and he's this lovable, huggable guy, right? Wu-Tang was the same thing to me too, right? Like Wu-Tang, yo, they were some scary brothers,
But
right?
you got
And
Jizza who teaches quantum physics. Like,
that, sure. But in 1994, no one was asking him, right? So what I'm saying is there is this weird shift of like, white America sometimes would do this thing where it would be like, they'll embrace certain stuff. They'll be like, oh wow, okay. But then you look at how they were treated years and years ago. So like I said, I just think it's interesting. So like go back, if you go back and look at how Snoop was treated, if you go back and look at, I mean, hell, NWA and how they were treated, and now Dr. Dre is just this mogul, right? So a lot of that, you know, same thing I say about somebody like Muhammad Ali, where Muhammad Ali lost years of his career protesting the war and was one of the most hated men in America. Then all of a sudden, white America loves him now when he's holding that torch for the '96 Olympics and he has Parkinson's because that fiery black man is gone, right? So sometimes, I want things to be embraced at the height of the fire, not when the fire dims down a little bit. But we'll see what happens. It's like I don't know. I don't know. I think this past November I just don't trust. I just don't trust white people. That's what I'm just saying. Like that's what it is. Like they go on Twitter and be outraged about something. And I'm like, you know what? I don't trust your outrage. I'm not sure who you voted for. I'm not sure. You
I don't
know?
trust the ones wearing blue bracelets, just like I don't
Yeah,
trust the ones
like
wearing red hats.
yeah.
I don't have any friends doing that type of thing. My friends that are in that delegation, they're doing the internal work and they have been doing so for, all of their much of
Yeah,
their lives.
and shout out to the allies. I got a funny story about white allyship. So in 2020, um, after the George Floyd murder, there was a protest here in Columbia. And I tell people this all the time. You have to wonder how angry black people are to march in large numbers during a pandemic when in 2020 we didn't know how serious it was. We had no clue. So for people to be out there, they were really, really, really upset. So while one of these protests was going on, there was like some arrest that was downtown. It was all over the news, and I was just really, really in a bad place. And this white friend of mine, she sends me a text message. She's like, "Preacher, are you okay?" And I was like, I've been better." She texts me back, "Could my husband and I buy you a meal?" And I'm like, "Sure." She's just like, "Do you want Chinese, Italian?" I said, "Whatever you do, it'll be fine." So I sent her my address, and like 45 minutes later, there's like $100 worth of Italian food that's at the door. Amazing Italian food. My mom calls me to check on me, and she's asking me how I'm doing. And I'm eating this food. I'm like, "You know what, Mama? This white guilt is delicious, right?" So, so,
Oh, I guilt. Oh my God.
but I understand from her perspective. She's just like, "Yo, I don't know what to do. Is you hungry?" Like that's cool. Like I'm fine with that, right? So, right?
I mean,
Like
that's one way we do find comfort. I just, Ebony knows how I feel about a lot of these issues, and for me, I don't think I will ever understand the conflicts that I see. Actions speak louder than words, and I don't think that Black women, especially, will forget what happened this year. And that is why I'm all for a Rural Comics podcast. I'm all for what Carla's doing. I'm all for what Ebony's doing, what Preach Jacobs is doing. Because and even Ebony would tell you I wasn't surprised about what happened. I knew the results would end the way it did, would turn out the way it did.
But shout out to the
Um,
93% though.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to say to discourage anyone. I think because of the things I've experienced, I'm 44 years old. Even though I was born in the South, I grew up in the South, but I came here to Maryland as well. Maryland's supposed to be a very progressive state, but even, here I experienced a lot of racism, sexism. So for me, I wasn't surprised, but it just kind of just reaffirms why we do what we do. It reaffirms why we do the podcast and have amazing guests like you, because we want to continue to elevate ourselves. Not trying to be put ourselves above anybody, but if we don't do it, no, obviously nobody else is going to do it. So we we got to do it.
yeah.
So oh, so the next question is,
I threw it all off, ain't
oh,
it?
no, 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 no. I mean, there's so much I really want to say, but we don't. The time won't allow it. But psychologists say that we begin to think abstractly at age 12, which means we begin to think about what we are capable of and what we want to do with our lives. So, what would you say to 12-year-old Preach?
Um, all right. There's a story behind this, and this is so there was this rock singer named Warren Zevon. He's the guy that made the song "Ooh, Werewolves in London." That song. Anyways, um, and he was a famous singer in the '70s, all that stuff. And he ended up finding out he had this terminal cancer. And um, while he knew he was going to die, he decided, I want to work on one last album with my friends. And they did a documentary following him around. So it was kind of like a way for his friends to say goodbye to him. And he was on David Letterman. And Letterman gave him the whole episode, because Letterman was a fan of him. And Letterman said to him, "Hey, knowing what you know now about your illness, what would you say to yourself, your younger self, understanding what you know now?" And his response was, "Enjoy every sandwich." So, so 12-year-old me, all right, needless to say, I've had a few sandwiches, right? But, but,
Since you know how much I love sandwiches, I leave the hospital and I stop and literally get sandwich making stuff. You know this. So I love sandwiches. I'm sorry, Carla. I love sandwiches so much.
Just,
Oh gosh.
I get pumpernickel bread. I do the rye. Anyways, um, sourdough. I'm just naming breads now. Sorry for our gluten allergy listeners of the podcast. No, but I say that metaphorically in the sense of when I was younger, I was such in a rush to be older, such in a rush to, because like I've had this spirit for a long time where I'm like, I gotta save the world, I gotta do this, right? And sometimes I just really need to chill and just enjoy the moment, right? And I think that that'd be the advice I would say to 41-year-old me is that I need to really learn to be more in the moment with things, right? Because I forgot the true definition of the word nostalgia, but from paraphrasing, it was like a Greek word that basically it means never again, right? So nostalgia is like we feel this way because we've lost something that we're never going to get back. And that's why you see people buying old toys from their childhood and doing all this other crazy stuff and whatever, 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 right? And so I want to be I want to identify a moment when I'm in it, not when I lose it. I don't want to turn back 20 years and be like, wow, that was a great moment. I want to be able to be in the moment and be like, yo, embrace this, appreciate this. You know what I'm saying? Enjoy that bourbon just a little bit more. Like, enjoy your time holding this girl's hand. Like, enjoy that moment. So that would probably be the advice I would give 12-year-old me. And invest in Apple. Let me stop. So
Not invest in Apple. Oh my gosh. I don't know, maybe BET. Go back and tell your 12-year-old self to get BET so we could
but
have
yeah,
redirected it a little bit in the
because
timeline.
everyone talks about BET stock. Stop it. All right.
I'm saying we had
I love
Rhapsody the
Back in
Basement.
the
We had
day, maybe
106 in Park. Like, I
BET
think it would
back
be
in the
different
day.
if, yeah, 12-year-old Preach could have got a hold of it and kept, the Rhapsody the Basement with Tigger and 106 in Park. I mean, like when you say nostalgia, never get that back.
It's
Mhm.
just gone,
Ah,
man.
not in this TikTok generation. So talking about culture and what things you tell your 12-year-old self and such, what would you want people to read about when they hear you interview or read things about you? What do you want them to think about in terms of your contributions to the culture?
Um, I want them to. I made a deal with my family. So I'm a columnist here for the Post Courier Free Times. And it's weird because I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm the only black columnist here. Um, and so I would write about very hyper personal things. I would write about depression, or I wrote about an article taking medication for the first time for depression and what that does to certain things and just being really, really vulnerable about things like that. And when both of my parents were diagnosed with cancer within 3 months of each other.
Mm.
And father had prostate cancer, stage 4, my mom had breast cancer. And I have a special needs sister and I have an older brother. And so I'm in a situation, my brother and I, we needed to be able to communicate a lot better because there was a real possibility we might lose mom and dad, right? And so my theory as a column writer became whatever I'm most insecure about, write about it. Like lean into it. Whatever I'm the most afraid of, most shy of, write about it. And and that work had become the most celebrated work that I've done. I got the greatest responses that made me feel closer to my family. And my goal with what the work that I do is, I have an album named Frances after my grandmother. And in a weird way, I was just like, all right, well, I'm using this platform that I have. I kind of want to tell her story. Her growing up in the Jim Crow South, born in the 1920s. When she was a little girl, her great grandmother used to live with her, and her great grandmother used to be an enslaved woman. And so I realized by me interacting with my grandmother and her interacting with her great grandmother is 1 degree of separation, you know, of being with someone that was with someone enslaved. So we think it's so far away. And so I was just like, all right, well, the work that I do has to be love letters to the ancestors. And that's a responsibility of the work that I think I want to do. And I say not that I think I want to do that. I hope I'm doing that, but other people and the people that read it, they're going to be the ones to determine what they're going to get out of that. But that's my intention. Um, is the work to be that ultimately be that. So more than just having black conversations with black folks, I want to be hyper specific and be like, hey, I want to talk to my granny. I want to talk to the relatives that couldn't have spoken out or done these certain things, and I be the vessel to tell their story. So as far as what I want the people to get out of that work, I want them to be like, well, damn, he loved his people. When people ask me what I love most about my family, I'm like, they're mine. You know what I'm saying? Like they're mine. Flaws, everything included, they're mine.
Yeah.
And I want them to feel the same way about me.
That's beautiful.
Y'all about to make me cry, man. How this podcast ought to make me cry, man? I was going to talk about comics. I'm talking brain. I'm about to cry.
Well, you're in a safe space with two nurses, one who's been a hospice nurse and talks about grief in comics, and we talk about health. And so, mental health, we talk about it a lot. It's incredibly important. Therapy for Black men, therapy for Black girls, shout out to them and the work that they're doing. So, you're in the perfect space if you want to cry.
Hmm.
I'm an ugly crier too, man. I'm a Viola Davis snot bubble crier. I'm not gonna be the, Denzel and Gore with that single tear. No, no, no. Like
Look,
I'm
Viola, another one, real one from South Carolina. Like you said, we got all the
absolutely.
greatest. We got Black
Listen,
Panther, we got Catwoman, Earth, Eartha Kitt. We got everybody.
listen, Viola Davis, man. There's something that her whole crying is the Southern experience, the Southern Black woman experience, right? Like you can't be taught that at the acting school. Like Lord. She won that Oscar when she was in Fences with Denzel. She was taught, I mean, the snot was all over the place. I'm like, if y'all don't give her the Oscar right now, Lord,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, I love her. I heard her memoir, and my respect for her went like through the roof after I read that, her memoir. Um, so the final question is, tell us how we can support you, where to find you, what you're working on.
Um, I think the best way to support me is to um do what I do as a vessel, right? Like more specifically, people if they want to support me, there's products, right? Like you can buy my album, you can come to my art gallery, buy some art. Y'all feel free to donate. Mo better soul at Cash App, please. Anyways, but 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 I think more than that, I want to encourage people to support creatives directly, right? So I give you an example. I don't know how this happens in the comic book world, but in the music world, when we have, you know, when we have like Spotify and Apple Music, and DSPs, people are like, oh, I'm streaming your album, I'm streaming your music, but like artists make point oh eighth of a penny per stream. People think they're supporting, and feel free to listen to it, but the best way to support an artist is to buy a product for them. So if they're selling a shirt, if they're selling a record, they're selling a cassette tape, like find those things that these people are doing and buy them directly from them. Another thing too with certain cultures, there's certain hipster cultures that happen to snobbery, like music snobs in the black community, whether it's art or music, where they want to have a premium of the cool stuff that they know about. So they want to show off that they know about this obscure thing that nobody else know about. Look, man, I don't want to be so dope that you don't want to tell people how dope I am, right? I want you to share that information. I don't want it to be like, you ever heard of this guy before? I didn't think so. Like, no, don't, right? Like, don't use this as an opportunity to brag. If you support an artist, you want them to do well because the more an artist does well, the more they can work on their work. Because there's not a lot of Sanford Greens in the world that can just do their artwork full time. There's a lot of people that are working 9 to 5s and saving up to put these art projects out, these music projects out. So the best way to support me, support a black creative. Go if you go on somebody's Instagram page, see them got something that they selling, something they're doing, buy it. That's how you support me.
Wow. I think that's the first time someone's answered that question like that. Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely what you be talking about, Carla, especially in terms of like gatekeeping. Somebody be like, "Oh, you never heard of so and so?" Like, nose in the air. Same thing in the comic space, just like with artists, like you said, and like hip hop and stuff. People be crazy, like, "Oh, you don't know issue 5, 1984." Like, okay. Like shout it out then. Give me the link. Tell me what comic shop to get it from. Like, we don't have to have a war. It's like certain things I'm sure, I might know better than you, but like you said, who does that benefit? Sharing is
Yeah.
caring. Let's just all,
And I would say this quickly in that same vein, owning an art gallery, that was a stigma that I wanted to break, right? Because traditionally, art galleries are like gyms for people that are insecure. Like, if you ain't been in the gym in a long time and you're insecure, you walk in a gym, it scares you. So there's an intimidation factor when you walk in. Art galleries and art in general is kind of the same way, where, and historically for Black people, that my family didn't collect art because they grew up in ridiculous poverty. So how do you have extra money to put something on your walls, right? So there's already this intimidating factor and a factor of Black people not thinking that this is for me. And so the art community, you'll walk in a lot of these galleries, they got their noses turned up. They looking at you like, oh, you don't know this is an impressionist period piece, and they turn their noses to all that stuff. Like, listen, for me to be embracing comic book illustrations and artwork and pop art, I have a Shepard Fairey back here and embracing Sanford's work. Like art galleries turn their noses to that stuff, and I'm like, I'm not going to let you define what's important to me, right? And so my goal was with the gallery that we're doing, the money is not going to be selling artwork on the wall because I don't know people that can walk in and spend thousands of dollars on a piece. The goal is community outreach. I
Hmm.
want to have an opportunity for artists to put their stuff on the walls. I want, for a lot of these big galleries that want to sell famous artwork, I want to be able to say, hey, this artist comes to me and say, hey, my first show was in your gallery. That's just as important as when they're selling $1 million pieces. And so I think that's a responsibility too of having these platforms to not gatekeep, but to invite and to invite the community together. So yeah, I'm on that. I'm on that.
Yeah. That kind of speaks to one of your blog posts when you talked about when you had a conversation with Ninth Wonder and his
Hmm.
experience going to this museum, and he saw like some pages from the Gettysburg Address, and then right
Hmm.
beside it was a flyer to a hip hop concert at the 1520 Cedric Avenue in the Bronx, which is considered, where hip hop was born.
First place. Yeah. Hmm.
So all of it is art, all of it, because it's a medium that we use to express ourselves.
Absolutely.
And often, and like you said earlier in the interview, it's a mirror of what's going on in around us. So I agree. I agree. So any last uh any last thoughts, Ebony? I know you got a lot to say, girl.
You already know me so well. I was
Both my
already
computer.
asking him, Huey or Riley. You mentioned Boondocks and, Carl
Oh,
Jones
the
and
lightning
people from
round.
Boondocks.
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
do that
lightning
lightning round. All
round.
right. You go ahead. Go ahead.
Come on, Huey or Riley.
I, I'll be honest with you. I think I'm Huey, but sometimes it's more fun to be Riley. So.
He said he a hood.
Um, what about, okay, this is hip hop. Okay, what about would you prefer a cassette or a CD?
Cassette all day.
Mhm.
Cassette. Cassette. And and I hope my computer doesn't die while we're doing this, because I have to run in a few minutes. Y'all got any last things to say? Because I don't want this to die on us.
Well, thank you for being with us.
No,
Um,
thank y'all for having me. Support Black women. Support these Black women specifically. I'm not being vague. And the work that you guys are doing in the health field, Ebony, I saw your interview that you did on the show that's on SEE TV. Amazing, amazing work. If you don't hear it from the community, y'all gonna hear it from me. Support Black women. And thank y'all so much for what you do.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And you always a friend of the pod. Always feel free to tag us in your post so we can share it to our stories, share it to our page. And thank you so much. It was an honor and a privilege to talk to you a little bit. And I hope we get a chance to meet in person one day too.
Oh, listen, I remember I'm in Maryland a lot, so I'll come see you. Come see you
We
soon.
both really love your music. Me and Carla really, really love your music, especially
Y'all
your
about to make
latest
me cry.
record. No, I mean all of your projects, especially the Rona mixtape was super dope. But your project that you released last year, Francis, named after your grandmother, I love it. I mean, Sweet Love, all of the projects, everything you've done, preach has just been incredible. And I'm blessed to know you and call you friend. So thank you for being a friend officially now, not just
They
of
want to laugh.
me, but Aurora Comics podcast.
They want to laugh. I found this the other day. So, all right. Thank y'all so much.
All right.
I'll see
Have
y'all
a good
soon.
night. Bye.
Peace.
Bye, preach. Peace.